And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're taking a look at a game called Legacies. A pretty giant game in which, in this game, you are a mogul in the 18th century trying to make yourself a fortune, / points in this game. But you want to do more than that. You want to leave a legacy behind you, having your heirs come in and hopefully do as good of a job as you did. This is a pretty big game, like I said, involving economics, involving card play. It goes up to 6 players. It's a pretty big affair, a heavier style Euro game. And so because of that, I'm going to be reviewing this one a little bit differently. Starting with the fact, I'm going to tell you right up front what I think of this game. I give this game a 6, and I'm telling you that, which I hate giving numbers out in reviews because that colors the rest of the review. That's all people can see as a number. But what a 6 for me means is that there's a lot of things in here I thought were cool and I liked, but if I'm asked to play it, I could do so. I wouldn't hate playing the game, but there's a lot of things I didn't like in the game, and overall, I would pass it for many other games. That being said, I think there's some people out there who are going to love this. I know this because there's people in my game group who really do love this game, and that's fine. So rather than giving you an overview of how the game plays and stuff, you can find that elsewhere on the internet, how to play and all that stuff. I'm just going to talk about bits and pieces of the game and give you my opinions on them, which again are just my opinions. So here we go. We'll start by talking about components. Now let's lay aside my very strong disdain for the fact that I don't know how to put everything in the box. Come on, give me a picture. But I do know where some things go. So the game comes with these really cool gold bars, and we'll talk more about these in a second, for money. And that is the deluxe version. I think there's a cheaper version out there, but I'm supposed to put these in here, but they don't really fit. So you need to lie them in here on the side to get them in. Well, that's a real pain in the neck. Now, lest you think I hate everything, I do like this. This is the player one. Has a spot for your dice and your pieces, and that's really nice. And for the most part, things are going to fit in this box. But there is a lot of pieces in this game. The setup and teardown for this game is pretty immense. You need to keep that in mind. I mentioned money here, and there is definitely a lot of money in this game, and I got these deluxe gold components. When I first saw them, I was like, oh my word, these look great. And I'm glad they have these gold bars in the game because all of the money icons in this game show a gold bar. Fine. I do wish that these gold bars were washed a bit because it's hard to read them. And in particular, you'll notice the number is only on one side. I don't know why that is the case. Why not have the number on both sides? Because you'll flip them over, and then from a distance, the 1 and the 5 look a little similar. The 100 and the 25 look a little similar. I would have washed them maybe. As is, I was planning to buy some more of this money to use in other games, but I don't know that it's very functional. I had to ask questions about it a lot. I really like the player boards, having a special power. A lot of symbology here, which I found to be slightly overwhelming. But, you know, different things you start with. A nice 2D board to have all this stuff put into that. A place for your successors to go. And there's 2 sides of the board. You can flip it over if you want to play a more in-your-face side of the board. If you want to play something that's more of an attacking nature. So I want to talk about that a little bit because of these take-that abilities, which, by the way, you can ignore. But even in the cards themselves, sometimes there's ways to just completely mess somebody over. And I don't mind that in games very often. Hey, let's go after other people. But my concern in this particular one is the game is so long and so involved, and sometimes it feels like sometimes someone gets hit and they're already in last place, or they're not winning the game. And because of that, there is this kind of in-your-face situation, which I think is exasperated in a longer game, and I found it a bit off-putting. Another thing I found off-putting a bit was the successors. Now, first of all, theme-wise, I think this is fantastic. I like this idea of having them come in here. And even mechanically-wise, I thought it was really neat here. You earn double the gold from relationships. Heirlooms can be acquired for 1 fewer resources. Investments can be purchased for 50% less, and then the amount of money and things that they give you, I really like that aspect of it. But there are some in the game that are negative. Now, the game has a way around that where you can hopefully draw some cards and not have to play one of these negative ones, like the imposter. When forming a relationship, the base cost is 50% more. But it's also very possible for you to have multiple negatives and you're forced to choose a negative successor. Now, theming-wise, that's kind of cool. It's like, oh yeah, you worked real hard, General, and now this Lyman guy is coming in and he's ruining your business. Not particularly fun when that is you, and these can make a huge swinging difference in the game. As another side note, the idea here that when you play successor, if the symbol matches your symbol, you get one of these extra resources here. I don't think it's a particularly powerful thing, but it's very possible for that to never happen over the course of a game. It feels like a mechanism that should have just been chopped out. It's very random. What a board. It has a spot to put all the stuff in it, the tracks here. This is a cool board, and I like it a lot, with some caveats, and I want to mention a couple of those. First of all, this game goes up to 6 players. Now, I'm not convinced that more players is good. When I was first pitched this game by one of my friends, they were like, oh, more players is great because there's a lot of interaction and stuff. There is interaction, but I don't know that I necessarily love all the interaction. And a lot of the interaction is pseudo-interaction. Like, I'm using this. That's your factory. Ooh, yay. But it doesn't really mean anything. But I'm talking from a practical standpoint. Here's my hand. Look how big this board is. And then you have each player board, which is going to be around it. There's tons of cards. There's a bunch of tiles at the bottom of the board. There's a huge amount of stuff, especially these tiles, which have a decent amount of text on them. To play with more than 4 players is very difficult logistically. I actually was in a 5-player game where I sat in that position there. I had to stand where I'm standing now for much of the game because I had to keep coming over and looking at the cards that were here and looking at the tiles that were down here and looking at these here because I could not see anything. I also think it stretched the game out to a much longer length, but I'm just saying the more players you add, it's difficult to get to this board. Again, it also makes setup and the whole time longer. Now, I do like the tracks on the board. Very interesting idea here as you move up. Once you hit 50, and there's the 2 different tracks, and I like the concept of there being tracks. One, I mean, you essentially have 3 tracks because there's also money that you're making. But the one track with the points, the other track here, once they hit 50, you'll notice this track then goes to 55, then to 60, then to 65. And as these tracks get higher, or as that one track gets higher, you're not going to be able to go up farther unless you can get that much. So you can see here when it swings around the board, once we hit 150, you then need to go to 175, then 200, then 225 to increase more. That's pretty neat. Although there is I found it to be odd. I can't remember exactly one of the, when you kind of bid for stuff, if you win, you get to move up 20 on this track. And so if you're in this spot, you can't move up because you don't reach 25. So that's a little odd. But I think it's neat that you get those points at the end of the game, which can be considerable points. And then down here at the bottom, you just put another marker in case you go over 100 and 900, which is very likely to happen. The game is kind of overwhelming with choices here. So when you look at this board here, there are 10 different symbols that you have to pay attention to. The 10 symbols all stand for something, but I can never remember what they are. You're going to look at your board, and some of the symbols are good for you, and some are not. You're going to look at some of the symbols that other people have. And then you're choosing from cards out here. So this is kind of the main aspect of the game. It's pick a card that you have and play it, or take a card that's next to the board, and then you pick a, so these cards that are out there and the cards in your hand, you're sitting there and saying, do I want to do the top thing here? Oh, okay. Well, which one do I want to do? Or do I want to invest in an industry down here? Or do I want to discard at the bottom for resources or what have you? That is a ton of choices. So that's both good and bad. It's good in the fact that, oh, wow, there's so much to do. And then once you have 2 of those cards, you can start going for these tiles at the bottom of the board and doing them. And there's a ton of options. And when you do go out on the board, or when you're going to be moving up and down the stock market over here, oh my word, there's just so many options. And yet for me, there's so many options, and yet it's limiting. I might want to invest in a certain industry. And yeah, I want to be able to put out, I want to be able to do that, but if I can't do it because that card's not there. So then I got to rethink through all my options again. So it's kind of a weird mix of me of having a whole lot of options and yet feeling constrained at the same time. Now, I do realize for some people, that's the very definition of a good game. So I keep that in mind. Many games that involve a stock market, it's the central feature of the game. Here it's not really, and yet you can't ignore it either. As you're moving these different stocks up, you're selling them, you're getting victory points for them at the end of the game. But I'll tell you this, I found this stock market to be a little bit of a level of not intuitive to know how much money I'm going to get, how much money am I making. I mean, sometimes it's pretty obvious. Oh, you move it up, especially if you move it over certain lines here. It's going to be worth more money, and moving it down is bad, moving it up is good. I get all that, but sometimes you have to sit there and there's a decent amount of mathiness to the game, especially since the numbers are all over the place with everything. Like, for example, going here, you get 24 money, then 10, then 4, then 2. Here you get 2, then 10, then 6, and 2, and 20, and 10, and 6, and 4. There's just vast amounts of money all over the place, and you will have tons of money and tons of points at the end of the game. But it's always hard for me during the course of the game to gauge how much is $5 worth. I don't know. At the beginning of the game, it seems like it's worth a lot. Near the end of the game, it seems like it's worth a little. But this stock market is a central part of the game, and yet I don't feel like I ever fully grokked it. And I usually do pretty decently at stock market games, but this one felt a little outside my comfort zone. And this is another thing that, again, this is a personal issue for me, but these resources, and it's cool to have these different kinds of resources in the game, but I kind of struggled with, well, what exactly are these resources? Thematically, they didn't really help that much, but also, what's the value of a resource? When do I take the resources? And these cards that you are both taking from opponents and buying for yourself. I mean, I get it. If you get them for yourself, it's money. If you take them from opponent, it's points. But it was this convoluted cards all over the board. I found it difficult to keep track of, and once again, difficult to kind of grasp how much they were of any kind of value. I do want to say I like these tiles, other than the fact that they're hard to see from certain angles on the board. But having the different tiles that you can use to flip over that do various effects, yes, it's overwhelming at first, and you really kind of need to have these memorized to do well at the end of the game, and because this is what triggers the end of a generation when we turn over a certain amount of these mandatory and non-mandatory actions. But these tiles themselves give you some really cool choices. And remember earlier I talked about there being a plethora of choices. Well, this is part of it, but this I think is a good crunchy part of it, because I want to be the first person to do this, or maybe to be the person to collect dividends because I get the double dividends by picking that. This is one of my favorite mechanisms in games, is an action that everyone does, but the person who picks it gets the bonus. And so this is actually a part of the game that makes sense, although like I said, there's a lot going on and you probably need to memorize them to do well at it. There's a lot going on, and I know the fans of this game may rip my review and say to shreds and say, but this is right, this is right, this is right. I grant all these points, but I want to be clear, this is not a game for anybody. I found this game to be a fair level of complexity in both the mechanisms, because there's a lot going on, but also just grokking how all of it comes together, which I think is a bigger deal. I would put this on the same level of a Vatel Lacerda game. This is a long game. Anyone who tells you that it's short is not quite being honest with you. There's a pretty strong length in the game, and anybody with any kind of serious analysis paralysis is definitely going to slow things down, because there's like I said, so many options, and another player might take the thing you were about to do, causing you to then have to reevaluate on your turn. I want to be clear, I also think it's a good game, but it's not for me. I don't think it's a great game. Now that's so what I'm saying, again, I know some people are going to love it, but I think this game definitely shows signs of maybe some things could have been developed off. There feels like there's some rough edges. I mentioned one already where if you put a successor and the icon matches, and it's like, well, are we playing some sort of gambling game here? It's just a kind of a weird thing. I also think the global market or the bidding in that market thing, that's interesting, but it's like another game shoved into this game. The making the deals around the board and playing the cards and the stock market, there already is a ton of stuff in this game, and it just feels like there might be one too many things going on at any given point. Keeping track of everything is a lot. I almost wanted to keep notes, because if there's endgame scoring, and I'm forgetting about that endgame scoring because that card's way over on the other side of the table for one thing, but also I'm looking at all these tiles here at the bottom. I'm looking at the cards. I'm looking at the cards in my hand. I'm looking at my special ability. I'm looking at all the different spots out on the board, and some of them give extra bonuses when you go to them, and there's just so much going on that it's going to take multiple plays for you to understand it, to get good at it, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. But when you come into this is definitely one of those games where I believe it has the Puerto Rico mentality, Puerto Rico, another board game, where you can kind of mess things up for other players and not realize you're doing it. In one game I played of this, I made a move, and the other players were like, you're helping so-and-so. Well, how am I supposed to even know that? There's so many things to keep track of. Well, you play the game a lot, you'll get better at that sort of thing. I do think it's interesting on the back here, they tell you what fame and gold and resources and foundation are used for. And the game does have an interesting way of tying it all together. I think that's kind of fascinating. You know, the tiebreakers and the turn order. There's a lot of neat aspects here. It just, for me, it feels like I'm treading water a lot. And while I usually am the bookkeeper of a game, so if you play a new game with me, I keep track of everyone's special abilities and things, and I'll say, hey, you know, you forgot to use your special ability. Don't forget that. You know, a person's like, oh, thanks. You know, I didn't realize I had that. I can barely keep track of my own stuff in this game, and yet you do kind of need to know what everyone else is doing. But let's give Legacies some credit here. It's not the same old, same old. This is a different game. So we have to applaud that. We have to applaud that they're trying different things. This is a Euro game, which is not the same old trading in the Mediterranean, build a castle, trade resources, worker placement. But that being said, there's a lot of systems going in here that are all working and interconnected with each other. And I feel like I have a much better grasp of the game now, and yet I'm still like, oh, interesting. Oh, wow, that worked that way. There's just so much going on. And for me, the game edges more into it felt a little like work than it did like fun. So, my recommendation is, if you're like me, this is probably not for you. But there are a lot of people who are really going to enjoy it. You want to play a long, in-depth game with a stock market element that provides you with a ton of choices and yet constricts you on some of those, with a bit of in-your-face action, a necessary keeping track of many different things, with fun economic stuff in the background, and just every game of this is going to feel different because there are decks of cards and decks of people who are succeeding you and endgame scoring. I mean, there is a ton of game here. You're not going to get tired of it anytime soon. Then you should check it out. I'm Tom Vasel, and you've been watching the Dice Tower. Dice Tower Judgment, not for me, but it's a good game.